Welcome to Satluj TV News. You're watching the News Hour with Angus Scott in London. It's Wednesday, the 26th of April. These are the main headlines from around the world. China launches the largest expansion of its nuclear arsenal in the country's history. The world's largest economy is just weeks away from a catastrophic default on its debt, as US political infighting brings the nation closer to the financial brink. Moscow resorts to social media to launch its new military recruitment drive. The US is accused of technological terrorism as it moves to block the export of all microchips to China. And in the face of a huge public outcry from global rights groups, Singapore hangs a prisoner accused of drug smuggling. China is undertaking the most significant expansion and modernisation of its nuclear forces in the country's history. The country is modernising its atomic deterrent with an eye on any future conflicts with the United States. Current estimates are that China has a stockpile of around 350 nuclear warheads, still relatively small compared with the United States and Russia. But it is growing fast and could have 1,500 warheads by 2035, according to a Pentagon estimate. Under President Xi Jinping, China has begun a massive military modernisation drive that includes upgrading its nuclear weapons to not only deter foes, but also be able to counter-attack if deterrence fails. Recently, Beijing has ramped up pressure on Taiwan and has recently conducted 2 major rounds of military exercises around the island, which it does claim as its own territory to be taken one day. It is likely China believes a larger nuclear force is necessary to dissuade the United States' involvement in a future potential conflict in the Taiwan Strait. The world's largest economy, the United States, is just weeks away from potentially defaulting on its repayments and igniting a firestorm that could engulf international markets. US representatives are set to vote today on Republican proposals combining steep spending cuts with a hike in the country's borrowing limit to head off a potentially catastrophic credit default when the government hits the debt ceiling expected within weeks. The United States is almost $32 trillion in debt, a figure that has been accumulated under both parties over decades. Congress has voted to allow greater debt limits more than 150 times in the past century, and in most cases the process has been pretty routine. But today's high-stakes standoff between Republicans and Democrats is threatening chances of a deal being reached to stave off market panic, which experts say could start happening in mid-May if no deal emerges between Congress and the White House. A default by the US could panic investors, supercharge borrowing costs, and torch millions of jobs. And the US has moved to block China's access to the most advanced semiconductors and the equipment and talent needed to make them in recent months, citing national security. China has dismissed those concerns, accusing the United States of technological terrorism and unfairly hindering its economic growth. It has sought to counter the US containment measures. Microchips are the lifeblood of the modern global economy. These tiny slices of silicon are found in all types of electronics and, of course, are critical to core services such as healthcare, law and order, and utilities. China relies on a steady supply of foreign chips for its huge electronics manufacturing base, importing up to $430 billion worth of semiconductors each year. And despite bitter opposition, the EU will today unveil an overhaul of its fiscal rules designed to encourage investment while strengthening scrutiny of government spending. The European Commission will reform what it calls the Stability and Growth Pact that limits how much the bloc's 27 member states can borrow. But the proposals have split the bloc between the more frugal northern countries, including Germany, and the southern states, such as Italy. Germany fears Brussels will overly relax the EU's budgetary straitjacket and undermine fairness within the bloc, whilst Italy and others argue the rules constrain their ability to invest. Member states' debts have rocketed recently after the pandemic and, of course, recession fears. In most EU countries, debt is both high and on unsustainable long-term trajectories. In Greece, for example, debt has been as high as 200% of GDP. In Italy, it's around 150%, and in France, above 110%. Moscow has today launched an aggressive military recruitment campaign, complete with videos and billboards, as it tries to bolster its armed forces. As Kyiv gears up for a counter-offensive after months of stalemate in eastern Ukraine, Russia released a slick new video which has gone viral on Russian social media platforms, designed to boost military recruitment. Last September, President Putin announced a partial military mobilization, Russia's first since World War II, sending shockwaves across the country and prompting tens of thousands to flee. Unwilling to announce a second mobilisation drive, Moscow has instead opted for a massive PR campaign, hoping to lure Russians with financial incentives. The campaign could be successful, especially in Russia's small, poverty-stricken towns. US and Philippine troops fired a salvo of rockets at a warship representing an enemy vessel in the disputed South China Sea today, in the final exercise of the Allies' largest ever military drills. It was the first time the countries had conducted a joint live-fire exercise in the hotly contested waters, which China claims almost entirely. The drills aim to boost Manila's military capability, while serving as a US show of support for its Asian ally, as China's assertiveness in the region grows stronger. Nearly 18,000 troops have taken part in the annual exercises dubbed Balikatan, or shoulder to shoulder in Filipino. Singapore hanged a prisoner this morning after he was convicted of conspiracy to smuggle 1 kilo of cannabis, despite rights groups decrying many flaws in the case. Tanggaraju Supaya was hanged in defiance of a plea by the United Nations Human Rights Office for Singapore to urgently reconsider, and calls by British tycoon Richard Branson to halt it. Amnesty International said the hanging showed the staggering failure of Singapore's stubborn embrace of the death penalty. The Asian financial hub has some of the world's toughest anti-narcotics laws and insists the death penalty remains an effective deterrent against trafficking. The White House reports that Taliban government forces have killed the Islamic State mastermind of a devastating suicide bomb attack at Kabul airport during the chaotic withdrawal of US forces from Afghanistan in 2021. The bomber detonated a device among packed crowds at the airport's perimeter as they tried to flee Afghanistan at the time, which killed some 170 Afghans and 13 US troops who were securing the airport for the traumatic exit. It was one of the deadliest bombings in Afghanistan and prompted a wave of criticism of President Joe Biden for his decision to pull American forces out of the country nearly 20 years after the US invasion. Figures just released reveal that more than 1 million children in the UK received food aid in the past 12 months, an increase of 300,000 from a year earlier, as the country battles a cost of living crisis. Out of the nearly 3 million food parcels distributed in the year to the end of March 2023, more than 1.1 million went to children, according to the Trussell Trust charity, which supports some 1,200 food banks nationwide. The figures come as the UK, a G7 member and one of the world's richest countries, grapples with the biggest surge in prices in decades, with fuel, heating and food and housing costs all soaring. And finally, one of the smallest Qurans on record has been uncovered in Albania. The postage stamp-sized book has been passed down through a family for generations, surviving wars and one of the world's most fanatical, godless regimes. Just 2 centimetres wide and 1 centimetre thick, the book can only be read with a small magnifying glass. Scholars suggest the book dates back to the end of the 19th century. Despite communist dictatorships banning all forms of religion, the tiny size of the book allowed it to remain hidden from the secret police. You've been watching the News Hour on Satluj TV, and those were today's main stories from around the world. Don't forget you can send us your opinions and your thoughts that you may have on any of our news items to our email address, message@satlujtv.com, and we'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, thanks for watching. For Satluj TV News, I'm Angus Scott in London.